Okay, a little update on the StarCraft here. See, we kind of rough sort of cut a hole in the transom, and and we got the hole cut in the keel for the intake. You can see kind of how I was going to mount the intake. Those are 1/4 inch, I think, by 4 flat bar, and then there's 1/2 inch by, I don't know what that is, 2 maybe, sitting on top of that. The reason I wanted to do 2 separate pieces is the angle of this flange, as opposed to the angle of the boat bottom of the hull, is ever so slightly different. So if you push this down flat, it doesn't match. You wind up with a gap here. So if I pull this upper piece up to sit flush on the bottom of this, and this flat with the boat, I'll have a little gap here, which is fine because I'm just going to fill that whole thing with weld, and then we'll drill, down through both pieces, and then also through the original hull to attach it. We use like button head Allen stainless bolts or something on the with the heads facing down, so you don't have so it's nice and smooth underneath. You can see kind of how it sits. I mean, you see a gap up there right now because of, like I said, the difference in the contour of the intake versus the hull. But once you put the bolts in there, it'll pull that up flush. The only other issue is that the very front of the intake, with it mounted using the setup I have right now, the front of the intake will be sticking down below the hull of the boat. So that'll either have to get ground. That's just the front of the intake is all solid aluminum up there. So once the thing's bolted, we were planning on flipping the hull over anyway. And we'll just kind of grind the front of that to match the boat. And you see we had to cut the keel guard back up to the front of that. And here's that piece. See how it kind of tapers, starts out, and then it kind of works its way until it's flat. So I figured I would reuse this piece, whatever the length of this thing. I'll cut it, the keel guard, that same distance, and have it so it tapers down flat. Like in this section will be right in front of the intake, so you have a nice smooth transition, from the keel to the front of the intake. That was the idea anyway. We decided to start doing some of this stuff now rather than get it blasted first. Say a guy I work with kind of had a good point. The abrasive that we use at work to sandblast is a steel shot. And blasting this thing with steel shot is going to essentially impregnate the aluminum with steel. And you know how welding aluminum is. It's got to be clean. And, you know, with the welding I need to do in here, I think I'm probably going to be better off maybe just cleaning the spots that I'm welding, you know, wire brushing the spots that I need to weld, and maybe try and do as much as I can just doing that before it gets blasted. We'll wait until we're ready to paint the boat before we do that. I don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet, because I can use we can use a different, you know, like it's called Black Beauty or Black Magnum, which is essentially coal slag abrasive, but it's kind of a pain in the ass for us to do. Everything, our whole infrastructure over there in our yard is all set up to run steel, and it's just it's a pain switching everything over to run a different abrasive. I mean, I can do it, but I don't know. I think I can get a lot done. It's relatively clean, and there's only certain spots I'm going to be welding to in here. So I may end up trying doing a lot of my structure and reinforcements and everything just the way it sits, now that we got it pretty well cleaned out. So I would like to be further along with this project, but Trump, his tariffs on the aluminum coming in from China kind of screwed me a little bit. I've bought a lot of aluminum and a lot of steel from this local steel yard, and I kind of went over there with a few $100s, and you know, had it in mind that I was going to buy just about everything I needed. And I ended up not hardly buying anything, because the price of the aluminum is skyrocketed from what it was. Especially the stuff that I need to buy. You know, like I was talking about reskinning this thing back here, and then adding, you know, extra layers of aluminum in between these supports, at least around where the motor and the intake are mounted. And I mean, just that sheet, like if I ran with 120 thousandths thick aluminum, you know, it was going to cost me $150, $180, like just for that, you know. And then I was looking at the rectangle tube to build stringers from, and yeah, the rectangle tube, aluminum rectangle tube is, holy cow. Yeah, so it's really expensive, especially do like 2 12-foot runs of it all the way up. It's just, I guess I didn't account for that. You know, I was thinking about all the parts I'm gonna have to buy for the engine and stuff like that to make it come in here, and the stuff for the pump and cables and gauges and all that type of stuff. I wasn't even considering the cost of the materials as being you know, even relevant to the budget. But so that was kind of a little bit of an eye-opener. But so I had to I decided, rather than throwing a little bit of money at this thing here and there, I delved into a couple of side jobs, and I've probably on both of them, I'll probably make a couple grand on both of them. And I mean, I think I only probably need $1,500, $2,000 to completely fund the rest of this project. So I could wrap up one of these side jobs, and I'll be able to do like I did with the LS swap and the Jeep there, you know, where I just I did a bunch of side work, and I got a couple, $2, $3, $4 or whatever in my pocket, and I was able to buy everything that I needed, like in one sitting. Like I sat down at the computer and just bought everything, and it all came in the mail at one time. I mean, that's, to me, like, so that's the way to do it, you know, rather than having a project that just takes you forever because you're just putting whatever little bit of extra money you got at it here and there, you know. Just come up with the money and then buy all the stuff to do it and have it all sitting here, and then you got everything you need and you just put it together. Besides the little knickknacks, little fittings and all that kind of stuff, but that stuff's readily available. So it's not going as fast as I was hoping it would go, but once I can get at least one of these side jobs wrapped up, it should start going pretty quickly. We'll start hammering on this thing. There's a couple other roadblocks here, like this clean out, which I use this a lot on my other boat because I'm always putting it in places that I probably shouldn't. But this is how you get the weeds out. You pop this thing off and you reach down in there and pull it out, and it doesn't take much to kill the efficiency of this pump. It'll get a weed, very little in there, and the boat won't even hardly get up on plane, or it won't even move in hardly any water, to the point where your cooling water that's coming off the other side of the impeller right here will actually cause the engine to overheat. So I use this thing a lot on the other boat, and I went to take this thing off, and I couldn't get it off. I was kind of scratching my head like, why the hell won't this thing come off? And I flipped the pump over and looked inside there. It appears to be epoxied shut. It was glued in there, and then it was sanded on the inside, so it was smooth. And I started thinking about it, and the boat that this pump came out of had Arizona numbers on it. And these jet boats are really popular over there, and they probably never deal with weeds. These guys are running them in rivers and reservoirs and stuff like that over there. They don't probably deal with weeds, so I don't know if this is a thing that people do with their Berkeleys over there, or if maybe something people used to do. Because when you put this back in there, if you're looking at it from the inside, you wind up with a kind of a seam around the outside of this, that I guess they figure, it could in some way affect the pump, or cause a little bit of cavitation, or who knows? I don't know. I think it's kind of stupid, but so I got to figure out how to get that damn thing out of there, because this pump is useless to me if I can't clean the weeds out of it. So I'll probably go inside this thing and heat it up with a torch or something like that. See if I can melt that epoxy out of it. The drive line here, that's a single drive line. I wanted to go to a dual drive line. I was looking at the price of the dual drive lines, even used, and people just want stupid amounts of money for them. But I never thought about it. But this is a 1310 U joint. And I have several Jeep front drive shafts. The H yoke on a front drive shaft for a Jeep is essentially the same thing. That makes you can create a double drive line with two U joints. You just put an H yoke in between these two yokes, and you're good to go. So I'm just going to do that. It won't cost me anything. I think having dual U joints will leave you a little bit more room for error. There's a few people I've talked to. I was told that you don't want the engine to be perfectly lined up with the pump, or it'll cause vibration. You want a little bit of, maybe a few degrees of misalignment. So the U-joints are actually doing something. The needle bearings are actually moving around in there and not just solid. Once we got the pump through the hole here, we slid the transom housing on. And it's slightly misaligned from this, the flange there, but it doesn't really matter. when you slide the bowl on there, there's a groove here where an O-ring sits, and you can see how much of how deep that the surface is there that sits on that O-ring to seal. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be, slightly off, and it's not a big deal. Most people put some kind of a seam sealer or sealant on the outside of it anyways. They're not totally relying on that O-ring, which I'm sure I'll end up doing the same. So yeah, everything it seems to fit pretty good. The exhaust manifolds that I was talking about in the previous video, I got from my little brother. Oh, jeez. So they're Mercruiser units. They're in good shape. They're not cracked or anything like that. I'm gonna run these through the blast cabinet and clean them out. Obviously, they're a little rusty, but they do fit on the engine. There's no interference problems. There's no, you'll have access to the spark plugs. I ordered a set of header flanges for a Windsor and a set of header flanges for an LS to make my little adapter pieces. Those are the risers, and the risers might be a problem. I don't particularly like how they go straight down. I would rather them go straight back. Obviously these are meant to connect your exhaust hoses to a stern drive, where the exhaust comes out, out the back of the stern drive. But these have kind of a goofy, compared to most Mercruiser risers and manifolds. A lot of the ones I'm looking at, like if I wanted to get different risers, they have a water port here too. They don't just have these 3; they have 4. So they're not all interchangeable. It looks as though the bolt pattern is the same, but they wouldn't work. I can't, because it seems like a lot of the risers that come exit towards the rear instead of going down, they are on the center exit risers, no, not the rear exit risers like these. So I may have to find a way to make these things work. We were talking about having maybe a short section of hose come off, and then having like a steel 90 that you'd clamp this and clamp it to the 90, and then another section of hose coming off of your 90 to go straight back. Something along those lines. I don't know. Let's see if I can make these work or not. Hopefully I can, but I get the engine all dug out. It needs to be cleaned up. Obviously it's filthy, but I had this old Gen 4 Trailblazer SS manifold, as they call it, even though it's just a regular Gen 4 truck manifold, really. And I figured I'd kind of mount it. If I don't run a car intake, I wanted to run a car intake just to keep it low profile, but then I started thinking about it as like, if your risers are going to be way up here anyways, then what the hell is the sense of putting a car intake on it? If the risers are going to be this high anyways, I might as well have a truck intake on it. The truck intakes are a lot better anyways, especially for torque production. on at lower RPMs, which is where this engine is going to spend most of its time. I'm not building this thing to go out and drag race people. I'm building it to just run down the river 20 miles an hour. So these would be a much better intake. Obviously, I'm not going to run drive-by-wire. I was looking at the adapters to go from a 4-bolt down back to the old 3-bolt throttle body. They're cheap, you know, and yeah, that's if I even run this intake. Like, I got there's the old style Gen 3 truck intake up there, and I got a couple more of those out in the shed. I could just run one of those. Probably would never notice the difference, but these intakes just look a little bit nicer. I don't know. The old Gen 3 ones, those things are butt ugly. But yeah, we'll probably clean this thing all up. Take a spin tip, power washer, and clean this thing all up and make it look half-assed decent anyway. I ordered these, which is going to make connecting the water hoses a whole lot easier. Obviously, your engine plates, the motor plates or whatever, actually use these as well. So you'll have a motor plate that comes up and attaches here, and then this will be on top of the motor plate. So you're going to have 2 sets of gaskets there, but that's fine. There's a bunch of little knick-knack stuff like that I've just been kind of ordering as I go, as I think about it. The truck oil pan is not going to work. I mean, I can almost guarantee the sump is too low. So I've looked at there's some steel pans that don't have the the oil filter mount on them, but they have like 2 AN fittings in place of where the filter would normally sit. So obviously, so you could run a remote oil filter, which I mean, I guess in this case would probably be ideal. Getting the oil filter up where you can actually access the frickin' thing. Usually getting to an oil filter on a boat is kind of a nightmare. So I may end up running one of those. Either that or I'll just do an F-body pan and just deal with, struggling to get to the oil filter a little bit. I don't think it'll be that bad. These oil filters are tiny. I mean, it's not like the 455 and the other boat where it's got this gigantic 1.5 quart filter on it that really sucks to get to, and you make a big mess every time you try and change the oil in it. So I don't think it would be that big of a deal. Just running a conventional, a GM F-body pan, because I like to cast aluminum better. They seal better. So, and then for your drain, they make these valves that actually will thread right into the pans. It's 12 millimeter by, I think, 1.75 or maybe 1.25. I can't remember. So you put a valve in in place of the plug, and then you just hook a hose up to it, and you just kind of leave the hose attached to it, and just kind of leave it laying in the bilge. And when you go to drain the oil, you just stick the hose out the drain plug hole in the transom housing and drain it. So, and a lot of all of this stuff, access to that and kind of depends on how far apart I put the stringers. And I haven't made up my mind how far to make them apart. I think I should probably order the motor plates first before I make a decision on the width of my stringers. I kind of was asking around and looking at forums and stuff like that. Seeing what the normal spacing is on stringers, but the more I think about it, it's like, who cares what people normally do? It seems like I can just make it however to suit my needs, and probably the further apart. I mean, you don't want them too far apart. Obviously, you'll have it'd be a lot stronger, I guess. I guess if they were closer and you're cutting your motor plates, so it's kind of just outside the engine rather than having these really wide motor plates. But I would rather them be as wide as I can possibly get them. It just makes everything easier to access and easier to get to, easier to work on. So, and I was looking at like 1.5 or maybe 2 inch by 3 or 3.5, 4 tubing. I haven't made up my mind on the what size tubing, because you jump from 1.5 by 3 up to 2 by 4, and the difference in prices is pretty substantial. So that stuff isn't cheap, but I think that's the way to do it is rectangle tube to mount this engine and to just kind of stiffen up the whole boat. So I got I got the spool gun for my welder here, and I'm borrowing a 100% argon cylinder from work because we never use it anyway. And I was just kind of doing some practicing because I have very little experience welding aluminum. I have a lot of experience welding steel, but very little with aluminum. So, and it took me a long time to realize, I guess, how particular your settings on your welder have to be for the particular thickness of the aluminum that you're welding. It's not like steel where you can be a little off one way or the other with your wire speed or voltage, and it doesn't really matter. You just change how you weld and compensate for it. But it's got to be right on with at least with a spool gun. It's got to be right on. And the difficult part is going to be welding thicker pieces of aluminum to thinner pieces of aluminum on the boat, because that's where I'm having the biggest trouble in my practicing over here. It's not easy to set the welder up to do that properly. So, but once I get all my materials that I need to do it, I'm just gonna kind of probably sit out here for an afternoon and take some thin pieces and weld them to some thick pieces and see what I gotta do. If I gotta practice for a couple, 2-3 days in order to get a feel for the thing. But, I mean, you can see some of the boogered up garbage welds I got going on there. So I'll get it figured out though. So I think that's about it for now. I'll keep chipping away at this thing, and like I said, hopefully I can get these side projects done so I can get some funding for this project, and once I do that, it'll start going a lot quicker. So yeah, that's about it for now. Thanks for watching.